Hi everyone. In this video we're going to talk about analogies or how to make analogical arguments. In analogical arguments you kind of have a source and a target. The source is pretty much the source of information that you do have, like it's where you have most of the information. The target, on the other hand, is going to be the entity or the thing that you're making a prediction about. So the analogy form has several premises, and so I'll put them all up here. Let's pay attention to the second one right now. So look, it says P has attributes 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5. And Q has attributes 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So this is a positive analogy between the source and the target. The source, P, has this set of attributes. Maybe it's kind, is competent, is welcoming, is et cetera, And Q has the same ones. Okay, so that's this information that we have. We know. Another thing that the next premise that's important, and another thing to note, is that when it comes to the source, we know the source has an additional attribute. So this is something that, say, is factual with regard to the source. So here in premise 4, you note that we're saying the source, in addition to having attributes 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, S has some other attribute as well. That is some other one, number 6. Maybe it's like being really fast runner or something. So now we get the argument kind of set up a little bit. The argument goes P is like Q in particular kind of respects. P, this whatever that is, has attributes 1 through 5, and so does Q. The next step then is to say, well, since the P has also some other attribute, that is number 6. And then the question is, or the prediction comes here in number 5. And the prediction is this: well, since the information we have, with about P and Q, that is that they have this set of information, and the other bit of information we have about the source is that it has proper attribute number 6. It's likely that Q has number 6 as well. Mordecai, that's the dishwasher. So again, if it goes here because P has this set of attributes and so does Q, and P has this other attribute 6, then it's probably the case that Q does too. Now there's a trick too. You have to understand that these attributes, the attributes 1 through 5, whatever they have to be really relevant to having that other attribute, that is the attribute the 6 attribute, the one you're wondering about, right? What do you want to make a prediction about? That one, number 6. Having these attributes needs to be relevant to having this other one, number 6. And if it's not, then it's a weak analogy. So this I will introduce you to some terminological distinctions. There are positive, negative, and neutral analogies. If you consider our source and our target, and remember, source is the thing that we know all the information about. Target's the one we're making a prediction about. Positive analogy would be to say that the source has attribute 1, I say being 5 foot tall, and so does the target. So that's a positive analogy because both the source and the target have it. A negative analogy is when, say, for example, the source has it, but the target does not have it. Oops. And notice this squiggly here is a not. So the source has a target. Or it could work like this, right, where The target has it, but not the source. That would be the negative analogy. And then if we consider the neutral analogy, something else occurs, and we have here we can go, we have the P and the Q, and so we'll say here that the P, that is the source, has attributes 1 through 5, and so does the target. So this constitutes our positive analogy. Now here we go, we say, look, the source also has attribute number 6. And so then the neutral analogy then is going to be the prediction that because the source has attributes 1 through 5 in addition to 6, that the target will also likely to have attribute 6. And so that is the neutral analogy. There are a few ways to increase the strength of your analogical argument. So one thing that you want to do is first, have know what your source is, know your target is, and you're going to want to have attributes that the source and a target share that are relevant to the neutral analogy. So whatever attributes they are, say 1 through 5, these attributes need to be relevant to having 6. So relevancy is very important between the attributes your source has and attributes your target has, these 1 through 5 here, and the neutral analogy, that is a prediction that because S has 1 through 5 and 6, and T has 1 through 5, it's likely the case that it has 6 as well. So this is going to be making sure that they're relevant, making sure your traits are relevant. And we'll go ahead and come back to number 1 in a moment, but you want to make sure that your traits are relevant between the source and target. So if you wanted to say talk about something as being a mammal or not, you're comparing goats, cows, you could say, goats have hair-like structure and cows have hair-like structure. Goats give live birth and so do cows. Goats are mammals because goats and cows share all these properties in common. It's likely the case that um, cows are mammals as too. So relevance is key. It's the name of the game in most inductive arguments, especially here. So, for example, if you're going to say that A is strong, if you want to claim, say, for example, that because A is strong, that B is strong. So you say A has these attributes that are relevant to, being strong, um, and so does B. Well, don't bring up things like hair color or other unessential things that they might have in common. Make sure that what they're sharing in common is relevant to what you're talking about, which in this case would be strength. So that's number 2. Now, number 1 is about increasing the number of cases of the analogy, and that will increase the strength of it. So what does this mean exactly? So take, for example, these 2 markers. So I say this marker is like this marker. This marker says Expo on it, has a removable back, a lid with a felt tip, smells really bad, has an inkwell inside. This one writes on the whiteboard. This one also says Expo, has a removable lid, the same weird smell, has an inkwell. because these two markers share so much in common, and this one writes on the wall, it's likely the case that this one too. Now, maybe someone doesn't believe you in that case, right? Well, you could say, well, so we have these two here that we're wondering about. Well, let's say, what about if we compare these two? Let's do different colors. These two. And you say, okay, well, this one has all the same features. Removable lid, removable back, ink well, strange smell, and writes on the wall. So does this one. And it writes on the wall too, on the whiteboard too. So there's another case in which the analogy holds. And then you would say, well, what about another instance? Well, here's another set of markers. Okay, and so does it have work in this case? This does analogy hold true in this case? Well, yes, it does. Well, if you've increased the number of cases where the analogy is held, then you have more justification for saying it'll hold in this one too. It's the idea. The next the next way to strengthen your analogy then would be to increase the number of attributes that the source and target have in common. If uh if your source and target, if you only say like there's two things in common, then sometimes that's not enough to prove relevance or even give a good prediction. If you can increase the number of attributes that the source and target share that they have in common, that are relevant to getting that neutral analogy, right? Instead of being a mammal in the case of the cow and the goat, then that's going to increase your argument. And now make sure when you're increasing the number of attributes that you're not also increasing the number of irrelevant attributes. There are a lot of things that everything has in common that are relevant to most topics. So make sure you're focusing on the relevant ones. The next principle here is that structural analogies tend to be stronger than superficial analogies. The idea here is that the underlying structure of things is what gives things their appearance is. So thinking of like a phenotype genotype distinction, like the someone's eye color, that phenotype, say green, would be coded for in their genotype, right? So if you knew what someone's phenotype, that what kind of green eyes they have, what they have green eyes, you can know that they can have one type of set of genetic codes, but you wouldn't know what code it was, what the gene was, just by seeing that they had the eye color. It could be a set of them. But if you know what the code is, what the genetic code is, then you can know what the eye color will be. So superficial analogies tend to just focus on how things are appearing, which only gives us a limited amount of information to make a good prediction about. And the last one I'll talk to you about is the greater to extent our ignorance about the two domains we're referring to, that is our source and the target, the weaker the analogy will be. So looking back at our form here, we have premise one, which doesn't need to be defended in an essay, by the way. Only ones that do are 2 through 5. But premise one, P is like Q. P has attributes 1 through 5, and so does Q. P, in addition to having 1 through 5, has 6. Because P and Q share these attributes 1 through 5, and P has 6, it's likely that Q does too. So that's the general form. Now, let's start applying some of these principles, the 5 principles that we looked at, to some examples. So here's Thomas Reed's. He says, Thomas Reed noted a number of similarities between Earth and the other planets in our solar system. All orbit and are illuminated by the sun, some have several moons, all revolve on an axis. Consequence, he concludes, it's not unreasonable to think that those planets may, like our Earth, be the habitation of various orders of living creatures. So I want you to now look at this example here. This is an analogy, and see if which of these criteria here, 1 through 5, it either does a good or a poor job with. And these points here are on the analogy handout provided on our Canvas page. So I'm not going to run through these giving you example, all of them, but I'll talk to you about this one. So here I want you to note a few things. So number one, Thomas Reed noted a number of similarities, so that's good, between Earth and other planets in our solar system. All orbit and are illuminated by the sun, so that's important, and we have all of them are doing that. Several have moons, all revolve on an axis. And consequence includes it's not unreasonable to think that these planets may also have life. So he's talking. Okay, well, how does this fare with regard to those other with those principles back there? Let's take a look. Number one is the greater number of cases of the analogy holding better. So here he does have talks about all that orbit and are illuminated by the sun and all revolving on an axis. But one of the problems here is that he kind of limits himself because he says only several have moons, right? So one of the things he's comparing there doesn't hold across all of them. So that's going to be a reduction in the number of cases that Another example is going to be, well, what about number two? The attributes being comparatively relevant. To a degree, they're relevant, right? But how relevant are these in particular to having life? Uh, they're 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 not sufficient, right? But it's perhaps that everything that does have life it might be necessary, but it's not sufficient. So a lot of planets have these, but don't also have life. So it doesn't. The relevance seems to be off there a little bit. The next one is going to be that structural analogies tend to be stronger than superficial analogies. Or sorry, we skipped three. The greater number of relevant attributes shared, the better the analogy is. This one, like we said it previously, it only has three, but kind of like 2.5, if we're grouping these together. So all orbit and illuminated by a sun, so we'll count that as one. And all revolve on an axis, that's two, but then only several have moons, so that's three. And so clearly the neutral analogy is to have life, so that's what we're wondering about. But this doesn't have all that many attributes that it's comparing between Earth and other planets, and they don't really seem crucial or super relevant to having life. Superficial or structural analogies are better than superficial ones. These are, it's hard to judge with this one without more information. It looks clearly superficial, but it's a short paragraph or sentence. And then number five, the greater the extent of our ignorance about the two meanings, the greater, the weaker the analogy. Well, look when this was written in 1785, and by this time there was some science being done, but it was still very new. And so, you still have Kepler and some people like that, but uh, everything is still kind of fresh. So the ignorance there was quite high. Now, at this point, I would suggest looking at this one as well and determining whether or not you think it's strong or weak. And I would focus on structural analogies, superficial analogies, um, and relevance. This one as well, is going to have a neutral analogy in it, so you can pause this video and read it and see if you can apply it to those 5 principles for increasing strength of your analogy to see if it's strong or weak. And this one, by Benjamin Franklin, this one has a general analogy form, and so I suggest looking at this video, this example here, and seeing if you can compare it to those criteria. All right, so at this point, we might be wondering, okay, well, it's nice that we have this analogy form and you have some examples, but how do you write this in a paper? So that will be the next part of this video. I'll show you quickly how to write this argument in a paper. Hi everyone. So right now I'm going to show you how to set up an analogical argument for writing in a paper. What you'll want to do is, let me adjust this, is get your analogy set up in premises. You'll want it numbered. And while we don't defend premise one, uh, it's it's nice to have it just in terms of setting up kind of the context for your reader. So here, premise one is sheep are like cows, sheep are herd animals, ruminate, have split hooves, and give life births. Cows are also herd animals, ruminate, have split hooves, and give life births. Sheep are bovine. Since sheep and cow have these attributes in common, and sheep are bovine, it's likely the case that cow are bovine too. So, what we're going to do what you want to do if you're going to write this in a paper or in a paper, or you want to write it in an argument, you would, you know, you would set up your uh, standard form argument like this. You can we'll put it in the middle, but tab it over, and then what you're going to do just to defend it is to take the first premise that we're defending, which is number 2, and you can bold it. And then underneath of this, tell tell us that explain to us. So explain to your reader why it's true or that it's true. Give reasons for its truth. Give evidence. Uh, and that's what you'll do under all the premises. So explain this is true, that sheep are herd animals, they ruminate, have split hooves, and give live births. So explain that is true, right? Give evidence, convince us, tell us, explain it to us as if we don't believe you, right? Make it very clear. Um, and then what you'll do is after you write a paragraph, my dog's very noisy today, I apologize. Write a paragraph uh, doing this part right here. So underneath this, you'll write several paragraphs, right? Or a paragraph or so explaining why that premise is true. Next thing you'll do after, say, you've done that is do the same thing but for the next premise. So here you'll do this. Then you'll do the same thing you did above. You'll explain that this is that each are these that the sheep have all these attributes, and here the cows have all these attributes. Now, after you do that, you'll state the next premise. And this one, you'll do the same thing. Explain to the reader that this is true. Give evidence, give a paragraph. Don't no one sentences. You have to give multiple sentences. Give me an explanation, give me reasons, give me evidence that this statement is true. Remember, the explanations are defenses, descriptions, reasons, and evidence for these bolded statements for your premises. Now, after you've done this, then most of the work should happen here in premise, in the last premise, in the conclusion, premise 5. So we're going to bold this one and do this here. Here, what you can do is talk about talk about the relevance of having attributes. Say these ones, right? These things. Oops. Talk about the relevance of having these attributes to having or to being bovine. pretty much what you're going to tell us is if you have if something has is a herd animal, ruminates, has split hooves, and can fly like birds, then that thing is likely to be a bovine. So, and that's pretty much what you're going to explain here. Explain to us why the prediction that because sheep have these attributes and cows have these attributes, and sheep have this attribute, why is it that the prediction that cows have this attribute a good prediction? And note the thing that you're using as evidence for your prediction or as this information for your prediction are these attributes. So ensure that these attributes are relevant to this one, because this attribute right here is the one you want to claim that your target has here. And so down here, explain in detail why it's really relevant, why it's likely to be the case that, in your opinion, increase the rational expectation of your reader, convince them that having certain set of attributes say 1 through 5, are relevant to having attribute 6. And that's all you'll do. And so these will be your different sections of your paper. If you write a paper, or if you're having a if you wanted to use this in essays later, if you wanted to say include this in an essay, then these would be just the different paragraphs defending or sections defending your overall general argument. But I want you to note it's important to have the standard form up here, especially for submitting a paper for classes that this video is relevant for. Okay, hope this was helpful for you.